Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Silver Savage podcast. Today, I have a special episode as I was finally able to pin down and hold him to it, my close friend Don Aviv, and have him on our interview on our podcast. Don's family is legendary in Israel's intelligence. They have one of the premier corporate intelligence organizations and companies in America. Don is a wealth of information when it comes to anything from web-based or internet-based threats to personal protection to anything in between, emerging threats, and honestly, running a business as well. So, with no further ado, let's get into the episode. Don Aviv, what's up, brother?
Hey, it's good to be here. Always with you.
Dude, your beard is as gray as mine.
Yeah, and I trimmed it. It was a little bit longer, but then I started looking like a terrorist, and I had to trim it a bit. So those are my kids' words, not mine.
And they're not wrong. Awesome. So I'm super happy to have you on the podcast. I know we talked about it in the past, finally connected, and we're able to do this. I'm sure our listeners will get a blast from some of the stories that we're gonna dig into. But actually, before I start talking about Don and Interfor, and I guess maybe it is a good way to start, is I want to talk about your father for a second.
Sure.
Because Don would not be here, nor would Interfor, I suppose, if it wasn't for him. So
100%.
tell our listeners a little bit of the lineage you come from.
Well, I mean, that's a long story, and it probably requires a couple of additional podcasts. But the abridged version or the Reader's Digest is that we're an Israeli family. Historically, we go back on one side of the family. They helped found Rishon LeZion, which is one of the first modern settlements in what was then Palestine. And then we go back way further on some sides as well. But the story that you're referring to is that my father went to the military like all Israeli men, or most Israeli men and most women during that time period, and was recruited to work directly for Golda Meir, who was the prime minister at the time. He was her bodyguard, or one of her bodyguards at the time, and it was a very different world in that era in Israel than it is today. The Shin Bet existed, but it wasn't really what it is today, obviously. And he was recruited to work by the Mossad. He spoke a number of languages, could blend in abroad, comes from a German background as well. So recruited to work for the Mossad. After the 72 Olympics, Golda Meir, the prime minister at the time, decided, rightly so, that, the terrorists that planned took part in the horrific attacks during the Munich Olympics should not get off scot-free and should be hunted down no matter where they are in the world. That model has been copied by a number of countries since then, but Israel really created the process, or at least launched it on a global scale in the modern era. So fast forward, my father led a team throughout Europe and in a variety of other places to locate and, as they put it, bring these individuals to justice. A book was written about it called Vengeance by a Canadian journalist named George Jonas. The movie was an option. The book was then optioned for a movie. It was one of the first HBO special type movies in the 80s called Sword of Gideon. And fast forward years later, an individual by the name of Steven Spielberg purchased the rights of the story, not from us, but from the original writer, and filmed in Munich, which with Eric Bana as the lead character. And as my dad says to this day, it was an appropriate casting because they look just exactly the same, which is, for those that know, will laugh at that. But the movie was a different take on the events, and it was obviously a Hollywoodized version. But that's the background of his exploits for the Israeli government. He came to the United States, started Interfor, the company that I now run today, and grew it to be a global business intelligence and corporate intelligence and security consulting firm that it is today. That's really the founding or foundation of both me, obviously, on this earth, and also my career.
Awesome. I would love to meet your dad personally one day, because obviously you hear of him, you know the name. And when you send me, I never connected one-on-one because I've known you for a few years. And then one year you send me a book. the book, and it's actually autographed by your dad. It's sitting on next to my bed. I love the gesture on its own was great, right? But obviously, just knowing a little bit of the background is just, it's on my bucket list at some point. I'd love to meet your dad in person.
Knowing my dad, he would love to meet you, and he would love to exchange stories, and he loves catching up with the the warriors, Israeli warriors of today, and consider you to be of today, and hear your exploits, and he lives vicariously through guys like yourselves. So I'm sure he'd be more than happy to meet you and swap stories.
That'll be outstanding. So you grew up in a house, obviously. You grew up in America. You were born in America. Your father, if I recall correctly, you told me at some point that it was suggested to him, maybe it's time to leave Israel because he's wanted by way too many people. So, and you moved to America, right? Or he moved to America.
Correct. So the history in the book is a little bit has been changed for a variety of reasons, but long story short, he started a new life in the United States and was working with various U.S. governmental agencies as well. A lot of at the time there was a lot of reciprocity and a lot of info sharing and technique sharing, and America was very interested in what Israel had done during that era for obvious reasons. And if you fast forward to post 9/11, that what the United States did to hunt down and to repatriate individuals around the world, was very similar to what Israel had done on a much smaller scale, obviously. So I spent most of my childhood here in the United States, and grad school and university and high school all here in the U.S.
Also, so what was it like growing in a house, where security and the intelligence lifestyle almost is kind of like, the bread and butter, right? It's for lack of a better term, it is coursing through your veins.
1,000%. I'd like to say, and I think that my friends and family and wife and kids still say to this day that that security and kind of that world always courses through my brains, and everything I do is a reflection of that. So I think it kind of instilled in me a certain level of understanding of how people work, what to trust. I saw every interaction as a potential threat. Growing up in a household where we knew there were a lot of people out there who were not happy with what Golda Meir had kind of set into motion. So security was always at the forefront, but I didn't, in full disclosure, I didn't know it was any different, right? I was a kid, so I didn't know that, we were avoiding certain areas. We were told not to speak Hebrew outside the household. We were supposed to, act like, regular Americans. We were not, and this was at a time where, arguments can be made that anti-Semitism was less than it is today, especially today. But we were supposed to blend in, and we were trained to kind of embed ourselves into the community and be quote unquote normal or regular. And I think that's that. And then learning to look for threats. And I knew at an early age, what to look out for, what to be concerned about, what to kind of feel in your body and your bones about a potential threat. And that was instilled in me at an early age. And then, so that's kind of, this is the only industry I could have gone into, right? I think this is what led me to where I am today. And, I had a number of jumping off points around the path to where I am today. But different iterations of my career had always had that, that skepticism, or that looking for the fraud, looking for the scam, looking for the threat throughout everything.
Right. So I was about to ask you, did you at any point growing up had any inclination to do professionally anything different than what you're doing today? Or was it always leading in that path?
I always thought I would not work for the family business. I would not come home in that sense. I always thought that I would set off on my own, and I did. And I had successes in other, realms, as I'm sure we're going to talk about. I was in the tech startup world. I am still to this day. I do a variety of nonprofit work and 501 work. And so I did a number of other things. I ran a global security department for, Fortune 500 for 5 years. So I did other things. I could have stayed in corporate America. I could have done that. But there's always that calling. It's, we provide services to people who need us, and whether it be governments, corporations, high net worth individuals, or nonprofits, or on the pro bono side. So there was always that pull, right? You can only go so far from home, and I think rightly so. I did come home and kind of went off from there.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And knowing a little bit about, because I'll be honest, we're going to get into it in a second as far as what Interfor actually does, but because Interfor is not your typical security consulting company. And I say that as someone that has had the privilege and the honor of working with you on several projects, and I don't even understand fully what you guys do, which is amazing in my mind, right? Before we get into Interfor, though, growing up, in your household, you had the opportunity possibly to go back to Israel and serve. Did you ever feel about doing that? Was there any debate along those lines?
Huge. I wanted to. I fought for it. I thought I was gonna. That was definitely. I come from a long line of men on both sides of the family that devoted, a ton to the country, blood, sweat, and tears. My great aunt was a leader of the Palmach. For those that don't know, she landed from, Nazi Germany as a 14, 15, 16-year-old girl, and then basically went to war immediately. And so, we have a long history of men and women who have done everything overtly and covertly for the country. And so I wanted to do, play my role. And this was a fight around the household. And, I was persuaded, I guess, fast forward, rightly so, because, I still give back in many ways, but I was persuaded that, I could do more. I could do more for the country and for our community by pursuing the American path. So education, graduate school, all the degrees, certifications, doing all that, and then providing services in other domains, and give back in that way, as opposed to, potentially, as better than most. I mean, there are various tracks in the military, and not all of them are glamorous or sexy. And even though you meet an Israeli anywhere in the world, and they immediately tell you he was in the special forces, the reality is that that's not the case. So I wanted to, and a day doesn't go by that I don't think, hey, well, especially now, with my cousins, my peers, my associates, my friends who are back fighting or back, being deployed, and, such as yourselves, multiple deployments in the past 200 plus days. I think, what could I be doing more? Should I have done more? And that's always, I guess that's the sign of a true Israeli, I guess.
Yeah. And discussions that I've had with you and my close friends and families, when people ask me, because I did end up going late October into November, and I came back and people ask me, are you going to go again? And coincidentally enough, I just got a call from a unit. This will probably drop a couple of weeks from now, so we'll see where I am. But, people ask me if I go back, and I said, honestly, I see the war being here now. I mean, with everything going on with anti-Semitism in our community, there's a lot of Jews in Israel. There's a lot more Jews outside of Israel. And if historically the government did what it could to protect it, right now it's on the hands of people like you and I that can empower the communities, right?
I couldn't agree with you more. And I would say, quite frankly, the dynamic or the model has been flipped on its head. Historically, the threat was to the Jews and the Jewish community within the Middle East, whether this is before, we're going way back, but, the Jews were not safe in most of the Arab world and in other places, or in Europe. And then obviously when you fast forward through the Holocaust, et cetera, it became even more apparent. But now what we're seeing is unprecedented anti-Semitism around the world coming out in its violent anti-Semitism. So, I think that, and I know that I can and have been doing significantly more for the community by, providing services, training, support, logistics, and a variety of other intelligence services to the community as a whole here, and, and in Europe and in the United Kingdom, where, I don't think the world truly understands how much negative sentiment and anti-Semitism and violence are being projected and directed towards the community. And I think we're at unprecedented numbers. And it's not, during the Holocaust, you would say, we're talking about Germany, et cetera, and the aligned countries. we're dealing with this in the streets of Australia and South Africa, France, United Kingdom, Latin America, Asia. You're seeing this everywhere. And, because obviously we're more of a global interconnected world than we've ever been. I think the needs for people outside Israel will protect itself. The soldiers will do what the soldiers will do. And I think the government will do. The government of Israel, in my opinion, and I know this is unpopular, has lost its ability to project its strength to the Jewry of the world. And I think that is the saddest development, if you will, of this whole scenario, from my perspective, as it relates to, kind of politics. We can no longer rely on Israel to help protect us. It's now our job to protect our communities and also give back to the country as we can.
Yep. And we can go on such a tangent, talk about leadership within Israel, within America, within the rest of the world at the moment, right? But we don't have enough time to go into all of that. But I agree with you 100%. I mean, we've seen in Los Angeles last week and the brutal attacks there. So, I agree with you. So Interfor, what does the Interfor actually do? If you're enjoying this episode, please go ahead and make sure to subscribe to our channel. Make sure you like it. And if you can, comment on this show. It does help our rating, which allows us to get in front of more people, bring some cooler guests for you guys to listen to, and overall benefit everybody around.
Right. In a nutshell, we are a boutique business intelligence firm. That's the vanilla description of what we call ourselves, right? We are a private intelligence organization. We provide investigative and security consulting support and intelligence support to high net worths, hedge funds, private equity groups, VCs, law firms, globally. So we're a truly global firm. In fact, at any given day, 70% of our deal flow or workflow is outside US borders, but it's either inbound, outbound. It doesn't really matter, but it's usually on behalf of a business pursuit. So what I mean by that, we break it up into 4 categories, really. One is our investigative due diligence. Anything that revolves around pre-acquisition, pre-merger, pre-investment into an individual or a company. If someone wanted to buy Masada Tactical, for example, they would probably conduct a due diligence into you. Hopefully that comes to me and I'll tell them all the bad things about you. But in reality, we'll do a deep dive, really intense investigation into individuals or companies without their knowledge.
So let me ask you this. Is this about the person or about finances or both?
Both. So if it's a deal, for example, if they're investing into your company, for example, the investor would want to know everything about you. If there's a reputational risk, are you a criminal? Did you lie about your, degrees and certifications, and how talented are you really in your space, and any other issues also related to potential concerns or red flags, like, does everyone in Maryland know that, or assume that, you're a little handsy with the help, or you're violent in your training classes, or, they want to know these things. And also how the finances are. Do you drive around in a Lamborghini when, you claim you can't make payroll? Things like that. So, I mean, obviously I'm kind of simplifying it, making it into a little bit of a joke, but the reality is we're going to conduct a deep dive. It's not just what's in open source. We'll be in the deep and dark web. We'll scour every aspects and we'll recreate your life. BK, we'll look at your life from when you arrived on US soil, if it's only domestic, all the way to where you are today, and try to recreate all the pieces. And we do that globally. So that's due diligence. We do a lot of litigation support, which is, when Coke sues Pepsi, when Apple sues Oracle, when all these companies are fighting each other, one side requires intelligence. They need to serve an oligarch on the tarmac of Heathrow, who's only going to be there for 30 minutes. Or, we do high risk service. We do a lot of fact finding. If you need to find a witness expert in the jungles of the Amazon, we'll send people in to go get that, all the way to kind of vanilla, or what you consider boring fact-finding information, theft of proprietary information. Are you stealing from your competitor? Are you, stealing employees? All these different disputes between companies, we get involved in a pre-litigation or concurrently with the litigation. Then what we pretty much wrote the book on is our asset identification and recovery service. So think the Madoff frauds, think the big frauds, think about someone, stealing money from BK and hiding it in Switzerland, Liechtenstein, the Cayman. we get involved. We find out, how the money left the deal, the transaction, where it went. Was it fraudulent in nature, or was it just a bad investment? And then more often than not, if we can identify where the assets reside today, we work with specialized counsel to help repatriate those funds. And that's pre-judgment, post-judgment, or in the pursuit of a judgment. Then lastly, which is, really what, we cross over, is our security services and our security officers. Full service physical security offerings from, high-end executive protection specialists, close protection officers, all the way to social media threat monitoring, which is our fastest growing sector. We geofence and geolocate tons of clients around the world, their properties, their boats, their lives, their kids. And we are constantly monitoring negative sentiment, threats, and anything around them in their lives. So if someone is, chatting through Telegram or something on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or the deeper dark web saying, hey, I want to kill BK, or BK is a jerk, we catch it, language agnostic, anywhere in the world. And then we identify and we determine whether, is this someone who lives next door to BK and has, 7 firearms, or is this someone who lives in someone's basement in Indonesia and doesn't have the, the airfare to get out of town? So we do a threat analysis. We have threat assessment teams, red teams, where we try to penetrate corporate entities one way or the other. We use a lot of Israeli tactics, which is why we're pretty successful at it. We have a 99% success rate of getting into facilities without, obviously you can blow up a wall and walk through the front gate. We don't do any of that. It's how a real person would penetrate a corporation or an entity or secure a location. And, a lot of cyber related work as well, but a lot more on the hacking side, determining who stole, why they stole. Are you dealing with a nation state? Are you dealing with, some pissed off 12-year-old Finnish boy who just doesn't like your product? So I know that was long-winded, but that's kind of the full breadth. The trainings, and as far as the training, as you know, because we defer the lion's share of that to you. Our clients come to us for specialized training, and when it comes to stuff that you are the best in class for, we send it your way.
Well, I do appreciate that. I do find it fun. If somebody's next door with 7 guns, I said, bring it. I have more.
Yeah. That's the thing. But you know what? You're prepared, and but most of our clients don't have 7 firearms. What they, most of our clients, would faint if they saw, a 22. Right.
So obviously it's very diverse what you do. So I would assume, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I know nothing about the technology side. You're talking about the dark web a lot, which is a term that's being thrown. I don't know that most people understand what the dark web actually is. So maybe you can talk about that for a second, but also the type of people that you employ to do that. I'm sure you need, obviously, IT guys, right? Cybersecurity guys, but you also need accountants, you need legals, right? You need people that are actual operators to do some of the physical stuff, right? So it's a pretty diverse skill set that you're looking for.
Huge. Our staff is hugely diverse and does not look like any of our peers or any of our competitors, because we, for the most part, we recruit, we identify talent, and we recruit talent. So it's not like, we don't put a job ad up and get anyone off the line. And so step one is we have to identify talent to fit our needs. So yes, you're 100% right about the talent. But before that, deep and dark web. It's very simple, everyone. The internet that and everyone knows, and you use, you Google, and your web, surfing the web, is literally, think of an iceberg. And this is the kind of the concept that is, or the picture that's painted every time someone explains this. The internet that is the tip of the iceberg. It's like 20%, 15% of the iceberg. Everything below it is the deep and dark web. And I can get into details on how I can, break that up. But the long and short of it is, more happens in the deep and dark web than happens in the searchable web. There are no real search engines in the deep and dark web. There are black markets in the dark web. There are places where you can hire everything from a hitman to prostitute to, exchange Bitcoin to do illicit activities, all the way to legitimate, private kind of enterprises. But the long and short of it is, anything bad that's happening, or, really bad, a lot of it's in the deep and dark web that you can't just search. So we have sock puppets. We have all these creations, these fictitious entities. We have all these tools of the trade to hunt down negative information. So that's that on that side. Just to answer your question about staffing, So for the boots on the ground, when it comes to close protection, lion's share of our personnel are either former Israeli operators or Shin Bet. We pull extensively from that. That's in certain areas of the world, because obviously you can't bring a former ISA agent to certain countries, nor can they carry in most of the countries. In the United States, a lot of our guys are 100% former law enforcement, depending on whether it's a driving duty or what kind of, is it a residential protections assignment, all the way to the former U.S. Secret Service and DSS agents. We have a lot of guys from that world because our clients travel the world and they're used to or have the expectation of that level of training and expertise. Now, it's not easy, because having guys that can carry in 50 states and just the knowledge and the experience, and it's a little bit different in Israel as it is to here, because in Israel you can retire from the services in your 30s or even before then, whereas in the United States, if you've done your 25 years with the U.S. Secret Service and you already had a short police career before then, and you may be at an age where you're not willing to stand in a doorway or willing to work a post. So we have to look at all that, and we have a lot of former military, because that's the change, I think, in the past couple of years. So many formerly deployed personnel returning, and kudos to the U.S. military. These guys, not everybody, but from certain backgrounds and training, will stand that doorway, will do the job, and if an order is given, they will follow it, and we like that very much. I mean, that's important for our clients. But everything requires training. So our investigators and our intel analysts, some of them are former intel from various agencies around the world, but a lot of them are PhDs, former librarians. We love former librarians research. We have a whole slew of former investigative journalists, because you have to remember, in my world, I didn't have my team doesn't have, they don't have badges, they don't have subpoenas, they don't have court orders, they can't, they don't have any of that. So what do they need? They need to be able to talk. They need to be able to listen, and they need to be able to social engineer their way into any demographic and in any situation. And we have a lot of undercovers that are in some really interesting worlds right now. And, these are former researchers, they're former, left wing, right wing activists that, we bring in and we train and we support. So we have it all. But it's about loyalty. We pride loyalty, intelligence, independent thinking above all else. And then we can train you for the rest.
Right. That's awesome. So, without naming any specific country in particular, I have heard of events where this dark web was used to influence. I don't say elections, because I don't want people thinking that I'm talking about Trump, Biden, and that sort of stuff, but longer campaigns over decades to affect political agendas, right? So do you guys deal with anything like that? Is there merit to those?
So yeah, 100% merit. But I will say the one caveat to your comment is that the deep and dark web is not what's being used for those initiatives. The open web, the above board web is what's being used for that. So every election cycle in major markets around the world, we get approached. We always ask, hey, can you create a dossier on this candidate? Can you create it? We say no. So the one thing we do not get involved in any stripe are ongoing elections, especially in countries that we have personnel in, right? Just not worth it. I can have a whole conversation about the Steele dossier, that could be another podcast, and I'll explain to you why it's misunderstood. And we actually drafted an op-ed on this. It was misunderstood. The way people are talking about, they don't truly understand how these processes work. It was a preliminary report, whatever. That's for another time. The story is elections are being manipulated and elections are being influenced around the world. Whoever has, and this is from, the African continent to Europe, to United States, to Canada, we can see telltale signs of people trying to influence. Now, it ranges from influence ranges is a big range, right? It could be everything from, hey, I'm just, a political action committee, or I'm a group that just doesn't like this candidate. And, I'm going to rally and I'm going to set up rallies and I set up, different dialogue and, whether I'm sending real information or fake information. We live in a post-truth world. So quite frankly, there's always that concept in the back of our minds. But I will say any election that's contested these days, the internet is being used to manipulate minds from both sides and all sides. And we see that wholeheartedly. Now there's well, proven situations, both domestically here in the United States, and in, for example, Brexit and various European elections. And, there's even talk about what happened in France at the EU parliamentarian elections recently. There's a lot of this stuff going around. But the answer is yes. If you are getting your information and news from TikTok and from, Twitter and from social media, then you are being manipulated one way or the other, and by somebody.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So Interfor recently also started another very exciting venture, which is the Interfor Academy, which again, I'm very honored to have been included as part of it. So can you tell us a little bit how that came about and what's the intent and how's that working? Because I know you already put a few webinars up and there's other training opportunities coming, right?
Absolutely. So we are very proud of this. This is the latest initiative of ours. It's actually the latest and one of the oldest. So if you reverse the clock, and there are some technical differences. The company as it exists today has changed, and the older company is no longer really truly in existence. But long story short, the concept of the academy has always been in kind of the roadmap of the overarching umbrella of Interfor since its nascent days. And it was because back in the 80s and 70s, there were executives traveling to far off areas of the world who were subject or potentially subjected to, threats of kidnap, KNR situations, threats, harm, just street violence, crime. And this is before the internet era, really. So we had training initiatives then, but the school back then was envisioned to be really a hands-on, boots on the ground. We take your executives, and we train you on how to survive in a scenario where you need to both live in an urban environment that's threatening, and a potentially, if you're a researcher heading to the Amazon, you need to learn how to survive. So fast forward, we realized after 50 years of knowledge and systems and understanding and personnel that we have a lot of stories to tell, and we have a lot of tips to kind of relay to the outside world and our clientele. So we launched the Academy both as a thought leadership platform in which we disseminate information and our best practices and know-how. We have a speakers bureau where we'll send people like the former director of the Secret Service, or really experienced individuals from the CIA, retired, and the FBI. The former chief hostage negotiator, for the FBI has given trainings for us, and we'll send them to corporate retreats and trainings, and they'll talk about a lot of things. The dean of our program has just written a book which will come out this summer called "Sell Like a Spy," in which Jeremy Hurwitz disseminates information and gives trainings on how to use spy tradecraft to better your sales processes. And that's that's a hugely popular program. Companies want to use spy techniques. It's not only sexy, but it's actually applicable and it's valuable.
Right. And to your point, Jeremy comes from the journalism world, right?
Yeah,
so
he's a journalist. He's cut from the real Interfor mold because he's a former journalist, and not even former. He's a current journalist, but he's also comes from the intel world. He's worked with our peers, our competitors, has been working with us for years. He knows how to apply the journalistic aspects to the corporate kind of initiatives, and he has some great stories about his work in China and in other countries over in the Czech Republic or Czechia now over the years. So, and then we go all the way to the boots on the ground. This is where BK comes in. This is where your expertise is second to none. We're talking about active shooter trainings or active assailant, which is your preferred term. We talk about Israeli fighting techniques. We talk about all the site hardenings, the boots on the ground, the executive protection, all the physical tactics, defensive tactics. We offer that as well. So it's the full gamut, and we bring in the best in class experts at every step of the way to kind of disseminate the Interfor concept of each of those silos.
Right. And we're going to get some contact information for people that want to follow Interfor at the end, but I want to plug the Interfor Academy right now in case people want to actually go and check, because some of the names that are on the cadres or the faculty, I would say, for this Interfor Academy, I mean, you're not kidding when you say these are people that are top of their field. So just have people
Especially
brought,
you, right? Okay. Yeah.
except for me. I'm just at the
No, it's
bottom of the
especially
list.
you. You're I always, as I always say, you're the purest expert that I have on that board, because no one can second guess your pedigree and your skill. Whereas some of these guys, the law enforcement world, the kind of the federal law enforcement world, everyone has something to say about one of these guys. Oh, he was responsible for this debacle, or she was responsible for that debacle. Whereas that no one could say BK led me astray or led me wrong. So that's
I never let it back. I will give you that, to the
yeah.
best of my knowledge, aside from my personal life, maybe. Uh, but Interfor Academy. So what's the website? Remind me, it's just
The best thing
interforacademy.com.
to do is actually just go to interforinternational.com. We have there's a a button for the academy. So interforinternational.com is the best way to go. And then there's as I said, there's a button straight off of that website.
If you want to know more about what's going on behind the scene, what we do day to day, from training to coaching to the people we hang out with, make sure to follow our social media: Instagram, Silver Savage Coaching, and YouTube, Silver Savage. See you on the other side. Yeah, perfect. Go check it out, people. I know there was just a webinar a couple of days ago, and the topics that were discussed so far were super interesting. Unfortunately, you always do them on Wednesday at lunchtime, where I have a standing appointment. But there was one about just maintaining your reputation online, which I really wanted to go into, because God knows I can use that. But the topics, because people don't think about it. But so I have a coaching group, right? The Silver Savage coaching. And one thing that I tell people is, like, they gotta have their social media presence. Even if we hate social media and everything it stands for, it's just the way of the future. And that's how research is done. If I want to hire someone, or I want to find someone, the first place I go is, let me check their Instagram page, let me check their Facebook and LinkedIn and see about them. So maintaining your reputation in those platforms is super paramount, and people don't understand that quite as much as they should.
Right. 100%. I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. Social media, online presence is really, it's made the world tiny, but at the same time, it's with that shrunken size, we now are in everyone's business, and whether it positively, negatively, and at the same time, we can also influence thought around those people. So if you will run a business, or if you're a solo practitioner, or even if you work for a big corporation, you have to be, if you're not maintaining a social media presence or an online presence, a proactive one, someone is going to create a negative one around you, or kind of push any traffic away from you to their, whatever their world is. Then there are people who do this for a living negatively. There's also people who just, are pissed off their former clients, employees. I can't tell you how many times we've conducted investigations and learned that the person disseminating the most hate was a ex-wife, ex-husband, ex-head of services, a VP, someone connected to the company or the individual. And if there's a vacuum there, so if you're not filling it, someone's going to fill it for you. And it's a scary part. And by the way, I'm not even referring or talking about the kids, right? We have to, our kids today are entering a world that's even scarier when it comes to social media, because there are the world of deep fakes, the world of, of kind of exploitation and sexploitation, and all these is horrible. We have a client who's, I'm sure very familiar to your listeners, very prominent radio host, who hundreds upon hundreds of deep fake, kind of fake endorsements, fake sites related to pop up every month. And it's our job to locate them. First of all, identify them around the world, locate them, and help to knock them down. But sometimes they're hawking like cheap products in China, or, all these like fake, potentially reputation harming products, all the way to just, stealing money out of their pocket because, I didn't endorse this, and now you're claiming that I'm endorsing it, right? So you got to be aggressive about these things. It's hardest for the former police, former military, former, operators of the world who come in, and security people of the world who come into this to the private sector, and all of a sudden, like, oh shit, excuse me, I'm sorry about the profanity, but
you can pass, you can do whatever.
Yeah, are now saying, hey, my department used to take care of this. Now I have to do it. I don't have the skills for this, but you have to. And if you don't, someone else will do something against you. and you have to look out for your kids because it's a dangerous, depressing world out there when it comes to that.
And it's such a fine balance between maintaining your privacy, which is the world these people are coming from, to your point, and now tell them, listen, you got to put your life out there. So where do you set those boundaries? Are you doing it correctly? How do you protect, to your point, your kids, your family, but still project a certain image? So
even for getting a job, we know countless former, Intel people from all walks of life, leaving their organization saying, hey, I want to get a job, but I'm very uncomfortable, tooting my own horn or telling the world about myself. I can't talk about most of my exploits from my secret life or my past life. So what do I do? But you got to do something, because a hiring manager or a recruiter or whatever is going to be looking at what they can find out about you. And if everything you say is no comment, I have no information, I can't talk to you about it, then, quite frankly, you're going to have trouble getting a job.
Right. No, 100%. Awesome. So I'm going to leave Interfor for a second. And you mentioned earlier that you were very involved professionally, business-wise, in other ventures. One of them, you are very much involved in tech startups.
Yeah.
How'd you get into that? What do you do with that? Are you still involved? What are some exciting projects you're working on, if you don't mind?
I've been involved in the startup world since the nascent days of the startup world. I was, as I mentioned previously, I was chief security officer for a Fortune 500 tech company, starting in the late 90s and then hitting the height of the bubble, the tech bubble, which burst, early 2000s. So I saw kind of a lot of the early stages all the way to where we are today, where we have these like crazily overvalued companies and, these, 25-year-old billionaires who, can't cross the street on their own, but have a genius, brilliant idea about something that may or may not be valuable to anybody. So I've seen the whole life cycle. A number of my friends and I from the security world got together and realized that we should be innovating in one of the older industries, like the security industry. Yes, you have every year someone comes out with a new megapixel, CCTV camera or a new software application that will find a suspicious packet. Every year there's, new. It's kind of like an arms race, but no one has taken a holistic look at the industry in general and realized that you have a bunch of huge players that don't want innovation. They seriously, significantly don't want innovation because they don't want to spend the money on it. They've got market share and they don't really need to, yes, they'll increase their existing product line incrementally just to, continue year over year sales, but they're not doing anything really interesting. So we got together and we decided to create a kind of an incubator and yes, there were some other organizations that I got involved with earlier and, a couple of startup kind of syndicates and incubators. And so we did a lot of that, but now we're looking at old school security technology and old school security needs and trying to apply new technology. And so one I'll talk about today because it's, you guys could all check it out, is a company called PropTech. And PropTech, it's boring name, proptech.ai is the URL. But what we're doing, it's an Israeli company, small nascent Israeli company. It's revenue positive. It's doing really well. It's embedded in a lot of locations in the United States and around the world. But it kind of reinvented facial recognition. So but for a security application, a physical security, access control, property management, and management aspect of it, room management concept. So what they did was facial recognition exists in a variety of ways around the world, as you know, and in different iterations. But from security, it's always been actually a poorly applied technology. It's kind of been as a biometric, it's been very poor. And so a lot of companies tried it, but never really did much. So we created our own technology. We built from the ground up our own hardware that can seamlessly identify you based off a picture. You upload your images. Doesn't require the old school, 4 pictures, and doesn't take you an hour to create a profile. Does it instantly. And you can actually get authenticated via your phone, because everyone has a cell phone these days, in a variety of ways. And then once you're granted access to facilities, you approach our technology, our camera, and it instantly releases. And we write our own code as far as property management and interfacing with existing access control systems. And we're in everything from HOAs and pool clubs to large fitness clubs, all the way to secure facilities and lobbies throughout the country and around the world. So really excited about that. It's young. It's a bunch of former 8200 guys came together to write this. They're lean, they're mean, but they're putting out amazing technology. And I'm very bullish on it because I think it's going to actually change. It's seamless. It's contactless too. So you don't need, you can walk into a lobby and boom, you're identified, you're given your credentials, and you're allowed to instantly, use an elevator to a floor or get into a building, go into a space. All of it is seamless, and it's great stuff. So you guys should definitely check it out.
Very cool. And for those that don't know, 8200 that you alluded to is a branch, or I guess it is a branch, of the intelligence corps in the Israeli military. But these are the people that do all your signal intelligence, your cyber intelligence. I mean, these are the geeks in the intelligence corps. But these people are really good at what they do. And
they're amazing. Yeah. And once, if you were to look at a cross section of some of the best developers and designers at high tech companies around the world, you'll find a graduate of that program or its peers. And there are many peers in Israel. So I use that term, loosely at the highest levels of development at the top companies, from Microsoft to Google to all Samsung, Sony, all over the world. And they're that good.
Right. And I also believe that they have the highest percentage of startups internally of their graduates.
100%.
So that's very cool. Awesome. So certainly people check it out. Pivoting again, if you don't mind, just because this conversation could easily be hours long. Let's talk about current events and what we're doing with the community. So you were very much involved, and you're still very much involved with an organization called CSS, Community Security Services. So how did that start? What does that do? And where are we going with that?
Right. So a little history lesson, and I'll make it brief and try not to be long-winded, but anywhere in the world that there's a large group of large Jewish population, or a Jewish population under threat, which, it's ridiculous for me to say that today because every of them are under threat today. But let's go back historically. There are groups, volunteer organizations that have been brought together, trained, embedded in the community, from the community, by the community, to protect itself. So they look for threats. They learn how to harden facilities. They learn how to, harden their communities, from the schools to the synagogue shuls to the community centers, all walks of life. Everywhere, around the world, there are these organizations, and a lot of them are loosely linked back to Israel or to various training, avenues. The United States never had it. They didn't have it for a variety of reasons, even though this is the largest Jewish population in the world collectively. If you go to the United Kingdom, there's an organization called CST, Community Security Trust, and they are like the gold standard for this, for what I'm referring to. They are a hugely, embedded, popular, also trained and funded enterprise, and they control everything from access control to running and integrating hardware, security hardware, and providing security for every aspect of the Jewish community in the United Kingdom. In the United States, we're a very diverse community. We're very spread out. And we're also diverse within the community, in the sense of there's people from the far left, from the far right, everything in between, those that don't even, wouldn't even consider me Jewish. Like it's a very, very complex organization. Community. So we, when I say we, the two original co-founders and the initial executive team realized very early on that there were significant threats to the Jewish community here in the United States, but no one willing to step up and take it from a unified approach and look at all the threats to all the communities and to train itself to protect itself. And so we realized that, everyone, and this is a benefit to all the police officers who listen to this and all the law enforcement guys out there, generally, and I think this is at least from the Jewish community, I wouldn't say this about every community, there is a belief that law enforcement is amazing in the United States. It does a great job, responsive, trained, professional, more than, in many of the other, in other countries. And also even within this country, the Jewish community really relies on law enforcement. However, as we know, even like New York City, where I am today, with 38,000 police officers, can't be everywhere at the same, when needed. So the idea was to launch this as a 501, a nonprofit, and to help train, approach the Jewish groups, organizations, synagogues, recruit members, young members initially, to put them into programs and training programs to look for certain suspicious behaviors, activities, train them every week on Krav Maga or whatever equivalent on Israeli fighting techniques and whatever fighting. It wasn't just that. It was whatever's applicable and easy to train to, anyone who may be 18 all the way to 80. So we developed all that, many different training modules, and grew it. And fast forward to where we are today, it's professionally run. There's a management team. It's funded by various aspects of the well-heeled community. And I think in last count, they trained over 8,000 members of the community in the past 15 years. And this is people who've graduated everything from multi-day course to very long, elevated courses that rival, I would say, definitely surpasses most of the security guard training courses, your average, but definitely surpasses that, and even rivals some of the police training that I've seen over the years in the United States. And the key knowledge or the key takeaway is that these people know who belongs in the community, know the risks and the vulnerabilities. So when you hire a security officer to stand in front of your JCC or your Jewish community group, and they're not from your community, they won't know that someone approaching them doesn't belong or is a little suspicious. However, someone born and raised and living and breathing the community can pick up on cues that are a little bit more applicable. Now, I keep mentioning the Jewish community. CSS is not just devoted to the Jewish community. It just happens to be where most of our people come from, but we are non-denominational. So throwing that out there, and many of our advisors and people who are involved happen not to be Jewish. So very important task, never more than today, I would say. But 15 years ago, people would laugh us out of the rooms when we were trying to pitch the concept to different groups. And they would say, there's no risk, there's no concern. What are you going to do? I'll call 911, we'll be fine. Which, as we all know, yes, you will be fine in an active situation, but you can't call 911 every time you see someone that's maybe suspicious or you have a concern, right? We can also cry wolf every day. So that's the concept, and it's ballooned and blossomed nationally. Now it's in every major Jewish community across the United States. And it's growing, and it needs more people, needs more support, and needs more, attention, quite frankly.
Yeah. And I've been fortunate to come to one of your leadership retreats and meet a lot of people from all over the country that were there doing different tracks from leadership, and the cadre instructors that you brought in. You mentioned the British element, so there were people from there, but there were also people from South Africa and Australia and Israel that were coming and sharing knowledge and teaching, which I thought was pretty amazing to bring all those skill sets together. Why do you think so? This is one thing that I noticed is, not growing up, but living in Baltimore for the past 20 some years, the community seems to want the help when something bad happens, but they're very reactive. They don't like being proactive. So if I approach, say, listen, I can help, I can share, I can help you build teams, I can train you, the answer is usually no, until something happens, at which point it is a knee-jerk reaction, which, as we know, is not ideal. And that also fades away pretty quickly. How do you help communities to stay vigilant?
This is not an issue that's focused or just solely within the Jewish community. And it's worth saying every community has the same situation or same issue. And it's actually a very American, and I hate to say this, a very American phenomenon. Yes, it applies other places in the world, but no more than than the United States. I'll give you the broader, picture. 9/11 happened. Right. And I know, those of us who were alive during that time and you were professionals during that time, that was a defining moment of not just, our careers, but also of the international, situation and story. Right. The 9/11 changed the way, we lead our lives in many ways. Fast forward all these years later. You talk to people today who weren't alive there or didn't have family in the military or family in law enforcement or intelligence world, and they a lot of the knowledge, the training, the know-how has disappeared, and there's a lack of belief that these things can happen again. You talk to people today. I go in professionally as Interfor, talk to corporations and companies, and kind of bring in best practices or information that or knowledge from the 9/11 era, and they'll say, whoa. That can't happen on U.S. soil again. That there's no way that'll happen. And you're like, and you look at these people and say, first of all, that was not an anomaly. Yes, the size, scope, and actual deliverable was an anomaly in how it happened. But attacks like this happen all over the world constantly, and you're just not paying attention to it. You're numb to it, and it can happen tomorrow, and likely will, right? So maybe not as big of a scale, maybe smaller, maybe the different deliverable. But at the end of the day, the threat vectors will always be there. And the fact that you forget so easily is a testament to who we are. I think societally, or as a society, I'm losing my my ability to speak English, but as a society, we've lost we're so stuck in I call it the TikTok era or the social media era, that we only remember what we did this morning or barely, and realize anything that happened a week ago was ancient history, let alone something that was a defining moment in U.S. geopolitical stance in 2001. So it's not alone. So the issue we deal with from the Jewish community is that they see a threat, and this is everything predicated prior to October 7th, because I will say the world is now different, and I think is different globally for the Jewish community, but specifically in the United States. But prior to this, there may be an elevated risk level because the Bureau, the FBI has said, or DHS has said that there's a concern, so everyone ramps up. They'll bring in the officers, they'll bring the training. BK, you'll come down, and then nothing happens for a couple of weeks. You're like, oh, we can all stand down. We don't want that posture. And that's the wrong. I'm not saying that's right or wrong, because the reality is you don't always have to be at level 1 footing for war. You could be in a kind of a relaxed and observatory position and posture, but you need to have the posture, period. And so I think we need to, as a society, not just the Jewish community, recognize that threats haven't gone away, will never go away. This is the way of the world today, whether it be terrorism, whether it be biological issues, whether it be pandemics, whatever the risk vector or the threat vector is, there will always be one. And we are now in a society and living in a world that we have to prepare. We have to focus. We have to, keep our eyes open, and we can't just wait for someone to tell us to do something. We can't wait for the government. We can't wait for society. We have to be prepared to take care of ourselves, our families, and our communities, because if we won't, no one else really will when the shit hits the fan.
Right. And I do agree with you 100% on the sense that this is more of a certainly an American phenomenon. I always say I hate when people in America come and say, BK, can you teach us active assailant response? I said, no, I don't want to teach you active assailant response. The term itself already suggests that somebody got killed. I'd much rather teach you active shooter prevention. Don't let them in to begin with, right? But we're so concerned on reactive measures rather than proactive or preemptive measures. And that seems to be...
Let's be fair, because it is an American phenomenon, but if October 7th has proved us anything, this is a viable discussion point, and that requires a lot of study in Israel as well, because I think we can all agree 200 plus days, since the horrific attacks, that attack should never have happened, should never have gotten off the ground, shouldn't have. No one, the local terrorists should not have been able to train to get to that point and practice and drill without anyone noticing. And when it did happen, they should not have been able to enter active military bases, police stations, and get as far as they could. And not only get that far, but kidnap and bring people back in. So It was a failure for a country that's always on, kind of on alert status. So if it could happen there, I fear, and I can't even begin to think about how horrific it would be if you took 20 of those terrorists, put them somewhere here in the United States, and say, have at it, Haas. Go, see how far you can go. I don't know how we would stop that.
And we know it's happening because we keep getting intelligence reports of extremist Muslim terrorists. And not say that Islamic terrorism is the only terrorism, right? God knows we have enough of other terrorism, from nationalist movements to ideological and so forth. But we know that they're coming through the southern border. I mean, I've just seen images, and I mentioned that in the past, of tents on the American side of the border with Qurans in them, not Mexican propaganda, right?
So I don't disagree with you, but I will also say, and I work with many people who study this closely, and we have friends of the firm that kind of live and breathe this stuff. And I'll tell you, the borders are issues regardless. But for example, let's talk about fentanyl. the mass majority of fentanyl is not coming through the southern border. It's being flown into JFK and other major ports of entry. You don't have to, smuggle it across the border. You can just FedEx it in. I mean, I'm being flip and I'm being kind of, comical about it. But the reality is, same thing with the extremists, the terrorists, and everything. They're coming through the northern border too. They're flying in, Delta. They're coming in many ways. You don't need to schlep through the southern border in order to get it. They're actually, for the ways they know how to do it, they're easier ways. Now, the southern border is a different issue in many ways as far as, risk and crime and threats and concerns. But I'd say anyone, let's just say you had your 9/11 attackers, you use them. None of those guys would have come, if it happened today, would have, transited the southern border. They would have come in the same way they came in during, pre 9/11. That's flights, cars, driving, it wouldn't be that.
I was using that as an example. I agree with you. I was using that as an example of just having the intelligence, just because recently there was a news that came out about actual Hezbollah terrorists, identified as Hezbollah terrorists, that was apprehended on the southern border. So I was just using that as an example. I do agree with you. They come from all over in all directions and in all means, right? But the point I was trying to make is, to your point, there was a scene in Sicario 2 where these three terrorists go into like a grocery store and blow themselves up. And I certainly feel that that's what we're going to start seeing here. More of those low-level terrorisms, suicide bombers, stuff like that. But it's going to be kind of like a death by 1,000 cuts, right? Yeah. Rather than one big event.
I'm more concerned about the bad guys that have been here, for years and are just waiting to, to do what they need to do. And again, listen, you don't need to conduct a terrorist attack against the United States and within our borders anymore. You could do this against U.S. interests anywhere else in the world. And, there's so many other ways, and you can do things digitally. You can, our infrastructure, talking about national security, our grid, all our utilities are. So if you can, and this because you work in the hospital systems, our hospital networks are the most porous, poorly protected, IT systems out there. And they shouldn't be, right? They're I can't get my own record out of from my doctor because I have to go through 90 steps. However, any 15-year-old can hack, can launch ransomware and lock up your whole system. So my point is, there are so many softer targets that are attackable, that are seizable, harmable from outside the United States, through technical means. So I think if someone really wanted to mess with us, you forget the lone gunman or whatever, start bringing down critical infrastructure, in various ways, like it's happening today, but it's happening by criminal groups. It's not even happening by nation states with the intent to harm America. It's happening by criminal groups who are making money because they're getting paid off because of ransomware. And I think that's just a ridiculous concept.
Right. No, that's fascinating. That's all I'm talking to you, see? I love those things because how many people out there are not thinking of that? To your point, we work with a hospital that had to shut down its operations for over a week because they couldn't access their own medical records for their patients because of some ransomware. So you're 100% correct in that sense. I mean, it's so easy for me. I mean, our whole banking system, right? Currency, it's all digital now. So you can handicap a full population, all society electronically. Yeah, no, I agree with that. Awesome. All right. So if people want to kind of get in touch with you, learn more about what you do, if there's anybody listening to this that may want to hire your services, what's the best way to get a hold of you?
So reach out to us online. I can put out my email address. If you want to put it in notes or something along those lines, we could do that. I'm easily identifiable in the sense that, the company is out there, the website that we gave before, reach out anytime. And I'd love to work with like-minded individuals, and we're always there to help. And we strongly believe that collectively we could do more to secure ourselves, our communities, our borders, our loved ones, working together. So I'm a big believer of leveraging each other's strengths. And so I may be strong in one sector, very weak in others. BK, you complete me in many ways. And I've just always been wanting to say that publicly. But in reality, we work together, leverage each other's strengths, and everyone who listens in has a strength in the security world, one way or the other, whether you realize it or not. So leverage your expertise, work to protect your communities, because if we don't, no one will.
I love it. Thank you so much. No, I appreciate your time. I know you're busy. Thank you for taking an hour to chat with us. And you stay safe out there. Let me know if you need anything from me.
You as well, my friend. You as well.